questions tonight. Are there people or creatures in outer space? Could there be millions of years, or the millions of years we hear of for the earth be explained by the time man was in the garden? And that's one way of asking it. And of course, millions doesn't work there anymore, it's billions. And then another is just asking, how long were they in the garden? The third question is, why don't you wear a title like Reverend, and that should be wear instead of were? And then, could anyone besides a Jew be saved during the Old Testament times? So you look at that, the first question, are there people and creatures in outer space? I don't really know if anybody's on the space station right now. Does anybody know if they are? If there is, there's somebody out there. If there ain't, nah. I look, that question comes up a lot of times, and it's a fanciful thing, because you see the shows, you know that you want to go to where no one's been before. You're searching out for other worlds. And the reality is, there is no proof of anything such as that. It is a fanciful idea, and the whole idea of them comes about basically from the doctrine of evolution, which is an impossible doctrine anyway. But the whole concept then is that, of course, the Klingons, they've advanced farther than we have. Who are the Klingons? Well, they were a step before in the evolutionary ladder. But evolution isn't true. But the concept, like I said, is based on that there were these amoebas that turned into various creatures. I was talking to one of my grandsons the other day about that. And that is such an unbelievable fairy tale whenever you look at evolution. If you were to try that in any other realm, people would say, you're crazy as a loon. But if you tag it with science, and you say it loud enough and long enough, then people believe it. But that is the basis, that there has been this evolutionary process, which clearly started here on the earth, billions of years ago. But it also started someplace else, and those people are more than advanced than we, and they're out there just watching us, waiting for the time whenever we are worthy of getting their contact. Or maybe they've already contacted us, the government's hiding it from us. After all, that's where all of the advances came from. The electronic advances and all of this, they came from space creatures. We couldn't do that on our own. Well, all of it is just a fanciful idea that just doesn't fly. But if you look at it biblically, we got a big problem. In the book of Exodus, the 20th chapter, you find, of course, this is the death knell to evolution, as are multitudes of other passages. But he says, for in 6 days God created the heaven, the earth, the seas, and all that in them is. Heavens, the earth, the sea, everything was created in 6 days. On the seventh day he rested. And there was no other creation. So it is a simultaneous thing if it were true. But again, you don't have the time frame there. We'll talk about that again in a moment. But there are no people millions of years advanced from us. Everything was created at the same time, Exodus 20th chapter and verse 11. But let's just suppose, let's be fanciful. There are people out there. Sometimes people talk about God and they say he's a terrible God. He's hateful, he's ugly, he's mean. Why? Because he's going to condemn people for their sins. Well, if you look at the scriptures, God created the earth with a purpose to be inhabited, but there was an eternal purpose in the book of Ephesians, the 3rd chapter, that his manifold wisdom might be shown forth by the church. That's the body of the saved. In other words, God has always saved people upon this earth. He gave the means throughout the Old Testament, looking forward to the sacrifice of his Son in the New Testament. But John 3:16 says, God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son. That's you and I. That's a figure of speech for the contents of this world. So he gave his Son for this. Jesus said, I am the way, the truth, the life. No man cometh unto the Father but by me. If there are people out there, if there were, God is an ugly, despicable, mean being. Because Jesus is the only way, but he didn't die for anybody else other than the people on this earth. Either that or he lied to us whenever he said he is a singular way. Maybe there's another Jesus for the planet Kolob. Or maybe there's another one for the people who live on the far side of Mars that you can't see. Oh, no, wait a minute, that's the far side of the moon. They watched the people up on the moon earlier. But I mean, it makes the Bible alive as far as the time frame, as far as the evolutionary process, as far as the fact that God's a loving God who creatures who are sentient beings who have this ability are saved through his Son. But if there are beings out there, they are hopeless, helpless, without anything. God is a terrible God to create a being who could do the things that these space people do, and yet he gave them no hope whatsoever. Well, those are some of the things that make me say no. Along with the fact that there's nothing there. Do you ever notice if you watch TV and I look and I see these titles, the ancient aliens and all of this stuff. It's right on there with finding Bigfoot, with looking for these other things. I mean, all of it is the whims of man looking. And you know why the shows keep on going on? Because they never find any of that stuff. It's not there. So you look, are there people and creatures in outer space? No. Because evolution is not true, because Jesus died for this world, and because Jesus is the way, the truth, the life. And God is a God of love and concern. We love because God himself is love and showed that love to all mankind. 1 John 4 and verse 19. Second question. Could the millions of years, or the time, whatever you want to put there, I was telling one of my grandsons the other day, I said, one of the problems that the scientists have is they want these long expanses of time. But those long expanses of time that they need for their supposed ideas of evolution are too long for many things that they have to deal with. And so, then they'll shorten the time. Then it's got to be longer. But it's foolish. Sometime we'll have a lesson on the dating methods, if you want to call them that so-called scientists use. But could these years be explained by the time that man was in the garden? And then another way to phrase that, my wife asked me that the other day, we were talking about it as we sat on the porches, how long were they in the garden? Well, the reality is the Bible doesn't give us an absolute statement. It doesn't say Adam and Eve were in the garden X amount of years, or X amount of days, or X amount of months, whatever it is. But you find that in Genesis 5 and verse 5, we know time began being measured from the beginning. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. And throughout that chapter, you have a first day, second day, third day, fourth day, fifth day, sixth day, and then the seventh day rested. But each day is defined by a morning and an evening. First day, second day, and that process in the Hebrew language always denotes that singular 24-hour day. And so whenever you look, Adam, whenever you're given an age, it begins from his birth. It's a dating process that you have. The years, the days in Genesis 1 weren't Another way they try to get the years is to say the day-age theory. So God created the heavens and the earth in 6-day ages, and on the seventh day he rested. So the Jewish nation was to observe 6 geological ages? No, it's days. It's foolish to try and make those other things. But Adam's years then were 930 years. That's like the years we have. You say, well, he lived a long time. Yeah, he did. If you'll notice before the flood, years were amazing what they lived. And then they began to diminish, and that's one of the consequences really of sin. We, as mankind, whenever sin came into this world, we also were blessed with the consequences of sin, and things began to die. But Adam's days were 930 years. Well, Genesis 4 records the birth of Adam and Eve's children, and none were born in the garden. This is after that. And so it's less than 930 years. If he lived 930 years, had children born out of the garden, they were in there less than that then. Genesis 5:3. Adam lived 130 years, and he begat Seth. Well, if the children were not born in the garden, that means less than 130 years they were in there. We're still not given a time, but you can deduce it from looking at that. But then you go over to John 8 and verse 44, and you find a statement made about the devil and his action of deceiving Eve. It says he was a murderer from the beginning. Whatever time that sin was committed, and they were thus cast out of the garden, was close enough that God simply said the beginning. And I'll say, okay, well, you got to look at the length of time that people live, so the beginning of their life, whatever. You can do it however you want, but the reality is you're clearly less than 130 years, and probably quite a bit less than that, since he says he was a murderer from the beginning. The truth is, some people believe that Adam and Eve sinned on the first day they were there. Now, what are you going to say? I don't know when. I do know that it was less than 130 days, 130 years. So, well, we're still stuck with that little problem of the earth being 4 or 5 billion years old. I'm not sure where the number is now. And the reality is, ain't no problem. Like I said, the dating methods. I was telling Cale the other day, I said, well, you've got the geological record that clearly shows the earth is ancient, right? And all you got to do is look in a science book and you find it. You got the different ages, and, I'm not sure where they are, the Paleozoic, the Cenozoic, all these different zoics. And there's a geological column that shows, okay, this one is where man is, and we started about 75,000 years ago, which, by the way, isn't enough time for the languages to evolve, but they don't mess with that. But about 75,000 years ago, they say, man began. And then you come down here, and certain dinosaurs and different creatures and such are in there. And I asked Cale, I said, you know where that's found, don't you, that geological column? Where? In your science book. Not found any place on this earth. You will not find that geological column anywhere. You will find places, the Grand Canyon. All you got to do is look at a different strata. But they're not in the right order, and some of them are missing. You can look, over in England, there's a place where the different strata are there. They're not complete, they're not in the order, but there's a fossilized tree going through all of them. How in the world did that happen? Almost like there was some kind of water went everywhere and stirred stuff up. Who's going to believe that? But the reality is, They say this creature is this old because we found it in this strata. Why is that strata that old? Because we found this creature in there. You ever seen a dog chase its tail? It's called science. But the reality is, the point I'm getting at, Adam and Eve were in the garden a short time. Less than 130 years. Let's keep it at that. And the idea that we have to try and look at the Bible and explain away what so-called science says is false in and of itself, because that's what it is. It is so-called science. There is not a scientific fact that mitigates against God's Word. There is a lot of scientific so-called foolishness that does that. And the only reason it is brought forth is because people did not want to believe the Bible. That's the crux of it. That's what it comes down to. And so, how long were they there? Short time. But don't worry about explaining away the years. There are so many proofs that you can see truly scientific that denies there has ever been the evolutionary process that they try to set forth. It is never been and never will be proved because it is scientifically impossible. That can be proven and demonstrated. Okay, the next question. Why don't you wear a title like Reverend? I'm still trying to get my wife to call me Lord like Sarah did. I said, you need to be like Sarah. She says, you need to be like Abraham. But that wasn't a title in the sense that we think about it. But there is, in the world, there is this problem, and I face it a lot of times. Anytime I do a funeral, I can guarantee you I'm going to have discussions about titles. I always make it a point to contact the funeral home, no matter what has been said or done or anything beforehand, and I say, I want to see what you have written down about me. And the majority of the time, it will be Reverend Jack Williams, or it will be Elder Jack Williams, or Evangelist Jack Williams. I say, no, do not put it that way. Just put Jack, if you want to put it that way. But put Jack Williams. And he said, well, are you an evangelist? I said, yes, I am. But it's not a title. Jack Williams, comma, evangelist at the 39th Street Church of Christ. Jack Williams, an elder at the 39th Street Church of Christ. Jack Williams, amazing, unbelievably eloquent preacher. But don't give me a title. I don't have a title. I am not even, we need to be careful about titles because you and I are brethren, but you can actually go to where we are Brother Jack and Sister so-and-so. Well, you can use that term in a proper fashion, that there is that association we have as brethren because we are children of God, as we spoke of this morning. But if it's used as a title, it's just as wrong as any other title, and I don't want it. I go, you get your hair cut. Oh, you're a preacher. Call you Reverend? No, call me Jack. It's a battle that is fought over and over. But the reality is, in Matthew 23 and verse 8 through 10, Jesus talked about those who love to be called Rabbi, Father, and Master. Now, that was a title to set them apart, set them up. And you tell me, if I want to wear a title, Reverend Jack, why do I do that? Is it not to set me up above other people? If I want to be called Father Williams, if I were in the Catholic Church or Episcopal Church or some other, why would I do that? Do you know who I am? Well, that was condemned in Matthew 23 because of those who desired to be lifted up and exalted. And Jesus said, you don't do that. You look and you find that the idea of finding a reverend, a pope, a father, a master, a rabbi, or whatever, is without biblical authority. And that makes it wrong. Colossians, the 3rd chapter, verse 17, 1 Peter 4 and verse 11, speak as oracles of God. You can't do that and give me a title. I can't do that and give you a title. And so I simply want to be that person who has a work. I'm Jack Williams. I'm a servant. I am a preacher. I'm an evangelist. I'm an elder. I am a husband. I am a father. I mean, all these things describe what I do. They're not titles. And to make titles for me is to go beyond what God has said. You find where the Apostle Paul, as he wrote to the church in Philippi, he spoke of those who were elders and deacons, and he even identified himself and Timothy as servants, but no titles. You find the exaltation that is there. In the book of Job, in the 32nd chapter, Elihu, as he was a little bit angry over the failure of the older men to speak when he thought they should have some answers, and he didn't really do any better. But he pointed out, he said, let me not, I pray you, respect any man's person, neither will I give flattering titles unto any man. And that's really the crux of it. I've never known anybody who wanted to have a title, who wanted to wear a collar, who wanted to wear a robe, who wanted to wear some kind of a ribbon coming down, that did not do it to set themselves up and be higher than others. God says, how can you do that? He is the only master. You want to set somebody up? Set him up. And so I don't do that. Psalm 11 or 111 and verse 9 talks about God's nature. Holy and reverend is his name. That's his character. Now, we are to have that proper respect, reverential fear and such for people, but not as one who is exalted in the eyes of God. And so I stand in awe of them and give them a title. God's the only one who deserves to be treated in that way. And in the next question, can anyone or could anyone besides a Jew be saved during the Old Testament times? You ever read Hebrews 11? Roll call of faith. Here are people who, previous to the giving of the Mosaic Law, generally they say, could you be saved in Old Testament times? And speaking of the Mosaic system, well, before that, you find righteous Abel, because he offered sacrifices that were by faith. Noah, he built the ark. I mean, you find all of those previous to that God counted them as righteous examples for you and I. So, yeah. And then you have Abraham. Abraham clearly, one who was following God. And it was through his seed that all nations would be blessed. All of that is before the giving of the Mosaic Law. Well, what about after the giving of the Mosaic Law? Well, you have another system that clearly existed. In the book of Genesis, the 14th chapter, you have Melchizedek, who is spoken of in the book of Hebrews, that Christ is a priest forever after the order of Melchizedek. Now, it talks about Melchizedek was without father or mother. In other words, the priesthood of the Mosaic system was based on lineage. But Melchizedek, he didn't just pop into the earth, but he had no father or mother in the sense of a title being passed down to him. Why was Melchizedek a priest? God said so. Why was Jesus Christ a priest? God said so. I mean, that's the comparison that is made in the book of Hebrews. So here you have a priest and a king and priest, who is outside of the Mosaic system. You find Balaam in Numbers 22. He was of the Midianite people. You look and you find that he was led by God and given words by God. You find Jonah sent to preach to the Ninevites. Why would God call on them to repent if they did not have a law from Him? Now, we don't know specifics of any of those other than the fact that they existed, but obviously God had dealings with them and called on them to do certain things. So now people look and say, okay, you just said then that there's a system besides Jesus out here that men can be saved by. No, I didn't. Before Jesus, these things existed. But you look, the Hebrew writer points out, there were different priesthoods. You can even go back and look at the priesthoods of those outside, even the system of patriarchy that Job existed under. It was the father rule. And so those things went on. But whenever Jesus came forth, in the book of Ephesians, there was a wall that divided God, the Mosaic system, from all else. Jesus died to take away that wall of partition and to make of twain those who were following the law of Moses and those who weren't, make of twain one new man. And that's why Jesus, in Matthew 28, he said he has all power, all authority. He is that singular priest in the Hebrew letter. He is a priest forever. He is the only high priest now. But you find that Jesus said to go into all the world, to every creature, and what are we to teach? His word. Whatsoever I have commanded. And he himself said, based upon that, he is the only way. There is no other way. Were there people outside of the Mosaic system? Yeah, that God had dealings with. But that has all gone away. There is one singular system today that is brought in by the sacrifice of Jesus Christ once for all time. And so, were there those saved besides a Jew in the Old Testament? Yeah. Who's going to be saved today? That's a better question. Better question is, who can be saved today without following Jesus Christ and His Word? Well, children can. You know, infants aren't born in sin. But in that sense, they don't need to be saved because they never were lost. So that's why a lot of people, when they refer to children, they say they are safe. Because they haven't sinned. They haven't been separated from God. But whenever that does occur, like the Apostle Paul points out in his life, in Romans the 7th chapter and verse 9, that he was alive without the law, well, he's looking back, his relationship with God. There was a time when he was alive without the law. That was clearly after the giving of the Mosaic law. He said, but sin came, or the law came, and sin became very much alive. It was revived in his life. When was that? Well, it wasn't the giving of law. That was a long time before he was even born. That was whenever he reached a point in his life that he was able to discern right and wrong and to be accountable for that. Not a set age. It is a time at which young people grow. They have that ability to know right from wrong, to make that commitment, to follow Jesus. And they choose either to do it or not. At that point, they sin. And the only way, the question then becomes, can those individuals who have now sinned, can they be saved without Jesus? Well, we dealt with that in the very first thing. Jesus is the way, the truth, the life. There is no salvation in any other name. That is it. And so I need to look at self. I've always been amazed. People get into all sorts of arguments about, this person down in the Amazon jungle, or these people on this island. There's some island, I think, off the coast of, I don't even know where it is, but there's a tribe of people there that you're not allowed to even go on to because they don't have contact with the outside world. Well, what about them? Well, everybody's worried about them and trying to make an excuse for them instead of trying to figure out how to get the word of Jesus to them. But it is a comforting thought. If they can be saved another way, so can I, can't I? God's not a respecter of persons. If he's going to save them without Jesus, I can be saved without Jesus. But the truth is, no. Instead of worrying and arguing for the salvation of people without Jesus, we need to do what Jesus says. Get that word to every creature throughout the world. Because there is no other way of salvation. And we need to live like we believe that. We need to act like we believe that as we speak with others. But we begin with self. You're not under the Old Testament, neither am I. We're all under that new covenant. Have I obeyed it? Have I become a child of God? If not, if I've reached that age, I'm lost. But God is a God of love. He's given a way of salvation. If we can help you to reach that point, to come to that knowledge, we want to study with you. If we can help you in that obedience, we're like Ananias to Saul. Why tarriest thou? Rise and be baptized. Wash away thy sins, calling on the name of the Lord. Still possible tonight. You need that. Let's do it as we stand and sing the song of invitation.